So just to tag a little bit onto the back of the introduction, from what I've found online, 4 novels, correct?
Yeah.
So far, 3 short fiction collections.
Yeah.
Many short stories anthologized into different anthologies.
Yes.
2 novelettes, which I guess are novelitas.
Yes.
In between, and Premio Heraldo de Novela. These are prizes. Premio de la Crítica.
Mm-hmm.
As well, and shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's amazing. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. So I guess it would be wonderful to begin with. I attended the Hay Festival yesterday, and so I saw your presentation.
Yeah.
And so the first question I had was a little bit about your background, the fact you published your first book when you were 21 years old.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about how that came to pass and how you found your path to writing at such a young age?
Yes.
Such a young age?
I was not professionally aware of literature at all. I wrote a novel when I was 17, 18 for my friends, a bit in fanzines and, very, very kind of private and underground kind of thing. And it stayed there at home. And a couple of years later, not that many, like a year or two, the sister of a friend of mine was working in a publishers, in Planeta. And she just mentioned that they were looking for a young writer because they were trying to do a collection of young people literature. Anyway, but they didn't have a young writer, they just had books for young people. And yes, and my friend said to her sister, "Oh, Mariana has written a novel. Maybe you can read it and try." And she read it. I don't think she liked it, but she thought it was okay.
Okay.
She thought it was not just, it was a not proper novel, but the themes maybe she didn't like. It was very urban, sex and drugs and stuff like that. But it was very young in the way they wanted something like that. And so I did, they took it to the publishers. An editor really liked it. And we worked together and I published it. And I was 21. So it was very, very casual, and I was not thinking about being a writer or anything like that. I consider it after the publication, but took me 10 years to publish another one.
And so what was going on either in your life in particular or in Argentina in general that drove you to write the story that you wrote?
Well, it was the early 90s. And the novel came out in 1995. And I think local literature was not talking about present day issues, or there wasn't that many writers writing in genre, even though Argentina has a very important fantastic fiction tradition with Cortázar and Borges and stuff, but it was very realistic and very political, and I guess that was the result of coming out of the dictatorship. So, of course, I was interested in that, and I'm really interested in politics in general, but what I really wanted was to talk about our life, everyday life as young people in Buenos Aires, that is a massive city, and the everyday life and what was going on, and so I wrote it for me, basically, for me and my friends, and with a lot of American literature in mind. From, I don't know, Bret Easton Ellis to maybe Kathy Aker, like very LA, New York kind of writers. And that was what was going on, and I wanted that. I want a novel about my generation. It's a very generational novel. It's been reissued, and it's very weird for me because I was a kid.
Right.
It's I like it. It's fun, but I like it for a kid writing that, and I don't know. It's good that it's out there, but I haven't read it again.
No. And do you feel like it's the themes in it that feel like it's a kid novel, or do you feel like you were just a less developed writer at the point?
No, a less developed writer. The themes are okay.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's an initiation novel, but usually the initiation novels are bittersweet. This is just dark. It doesn't. This is just But anyway, it's that, and it's interesting themes and stuff for a young writer. But the style is really I don't know. But maybe I should read it again, and I will have another perspective on it. But I didn't have any other education more than my own reading. That was all over the place. So I think I spent several days afterwards reading, also self-taught, but with some kind of, because I was a journalist, I was working as a journalist, with some kind of direction.
So did you study journalism, or did you just go
I
into
studied
that?
journalism, yeah.
You did, okay. So then when you say that you're self-taught, what did you do as a writer to try to find either technique or train yourself to try to fill in those spaces that you felt were missing in your writing ability?
Well, it was basically, first, the work with this editor was very important. Actually, I've never worked with someone in a workshop of creative writing afterwards. It was 6 months, extreme kind of treatment, like you can do this, you can do this, as inabilities. There was a lot in the novel that was in the first person that I was really not nailing it at all. Like every character, the voices were very similar. I didn't, So he really explained to me at that point, because I still couldn't do it, what were the gateways that I had when I had these kind of limitations that were just a matter of time, and how and what I needed to read. So I read a lot of writers because of dialogue. Like in Spanish, it's kind of tricky because we have many Spanishes. So it's not the same to read a Mexican writer than the Spanish writer or an Argentinian writer. And so I focused in Argentinian and the oral, how to do literary dialogue. We have a great writer that is Manuel Puig. He's the author of The Kiss of the Spider Woman. He's amazing. So if you study him, you kind of know he does very well, especially old ladies and gay men. But that's very useful because it's kind of a very expressive kind and thing. So you learn how to be up here and tone it down and stuff like that.
Right.
But I especially learned in the to study, let's say, I went to the Argentinian tradition, especially because language, Spanish is all very different. So, and then there's the translations. But I wanted to write horror, that there's not really a tradition in Spanish. So for that, I had to go to English, and somehow there I met the crossroads between the two traditions. But it was quite an investigation, let's say.
It's interesting because I mentioned to you earlier, my creative dissertation is going to focus on kind of a horror type story, which is different from what I've written in the past. And it's going to end up being in Spanish because all my stuff gets translated into Spanish at the end. And I was talking to my wife because when I was dealing with the editor, they said, well, what genre is it? And I wanted to say, well, it's like kind of haunted housey, which
Haunted
Dr. Sparns
housey.
knows about.
Yes.
And in Spanish, you can say Casa Encantada, but that's like more enchanted.
Yes,
Embrujada, but that's more bewitched
yes, or cursed.
or cursed. So there's really not a word that like nails haunted in the
No.
same sense as English.
No.
And do you think that that part of that is because there has not been that, or the genre hasn't developed in the same way that it did in the English language?
With not the same elements. I think it developed in oral stories that you can say it's a oral literature, but it really comes from mythology, superstition. It's another kind of. So basically, in that tradition, you don't even have him. There is words in which is quite amazing when you study it, but in some local languages before the Spanish that kind of nail it. There's a word in Guarani that says porá. The word is porá. That means a place that has ghosts or a bad vibe. So you can tell that maybe that was in the oral language, but it didn't translate to Spanish in general, and then to the Spanish from the countries, it didn't translate either. So we have all these forms. I think it's because it didn't enter the written form, and you have the con fantasmas with ghosts, but there's some for example, in Mexico is interesting because they say casas donde espantan. There's houses where they scare you, or something like that. They spook you.
So they spook you, yeah.
They spook you.
Yeah.
So there were ways, but no, there's nothing like that same word, and I think that was part of when I started to write, it was part of the challenge. It also appears, the word sometimes appears in literature that is not necessarily horror literature, like for it's very famous, the word when it appears in Wuthering Heights. Like Heathcliff is asking Catherine at one point, she's dead, and she's asking her, haunt me, like come back as a ghost. It would be very long in English to say that, but in Spanish, but in English just haunt me, and you understand.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that there's a lot of haunted houses, but we call it in a different way that can really express. And I think that little difference is fascinating to explore.
Yeah.
Because you really have to change perspective when you change the genre.
And so when you decided to go this route in writing in Spanish, one thing that I've kind of struggled with what I'm trying to do is, like T.S. Eliot wrote this great essay called, I think, After Strange Gods or something. Yeah. And it's about the concept of blasphemy, right? And he's basically saying that for blasphemy to exist, there has to be some degree of faith or belief in something. And so when I think about writing horror, I think that there's got to be in the reader, there's got to be some sort of belief in something spiritual, something beyond, for there to be that sort of sense of that ghosts are.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? And when you're writing, what are you imagining for the reader that maybe, like, how do you get this across to an atheist reader? How does that kind of thing work? Or is that something that you really even think through or struggle with or deal with?
I don't think the ghost is a religious concept or a spiritual concept in general. I think about ghosts as more a historical presence. It's the presence of the past and the presence of memory. I think the ghost in the most metaphorical way, that trying to give it like any kind of real entity. It certainly doesn't have it for me. It represents other things. It represents what is repressed. It represents trauma. It represents history. So there's other concepts that help me. For example, psychogeography. That psychogeography is a concept that many British writers use. That it's the idea that places have memory.
Mm-hmm.
So places are haunted because they have the memory of what happened there. And that keeps repeating. The fact that we use the idea of the ghost to corporize, let's say, this repetition, it's a metaphor, it's a way of how the unconscious works, or it's really that a ghost appears, and it's not metaphor. But what I mean is that I think about, let's say, something. We were yesterday in the Texas theater, and we were talking about this place is haunted, but it's not. But I thinking about this, the fact that the ghost of what happened there doesn't make an apparition in translucent ways, doesn't mean that when you enter there you don't think about it every time, and that's the ghost. I remember sometimes my grandmother was not a very nice woman, and we didn't have a very close relationship. And before she died, a couple of days before she died, she asked me the most strange question. She said to me, "What's the part of your body that you, after you take a shower or a bath, you dry first?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I couldn't think." And she said, "For me, it's the face." And that was it. And now every time I get out of the shower, I do dry my face first, and every time I think of my mother, and that's a ghost.
Yeah.
That my grandmother, who is a person that I have not a particularly fond memory of, appears every day, not in a way that she was mean or anything. It's just we didn't. I don't know. She was very distant. She kind of makes herself present every time. So I think about it. I think about ghosts that way, about repetition, about trauma. Trauma is the same. Trauma is something that happened in the past that appears in the present again. Every time, sometimes unexpected, sometimes it surprises you, like a ghost, you don't know. Like all the things that now we are living in a culture with the trigger warnings and stuff, like trauma doesn't work like that, and everybody that knows and has a real trauma knows that sometimes it's not someone speaking about it very openly, but sometimes it's a smell, sometimes it's something you see, sometimes you wake up from a nightmare and you remember it's totally different. That's a ghost, because it's in the past. It doesn't exist, but it produces something in the present that is the same thing. Again, like a ghost. A ghost appears and it says, something has been done to me, or repeats the same word, or walks. It's in a loop. So I think about ghosts in that way. Situations, history, anything you need for the story to work, that it's trapped in a loop that doesn't have really to do with material reality, but with something more abstract. In Argentina, it's very easy to do the political metaphor because of the disappeared people in the dictatorship, and also because of an economic situation that keeps on being bad, but somehow the same. We always have the same cycle of debt, crash, boom, disaster, recovery, again, and the same characteristics, like it's always the same. Debt, inflation, crash, new government, debt, inflation, crash, new government, happiness for a month, and this from the 40s, more or less. Right. So it's kind of ghostly. You have that sense of, this is a dream, this is a repetition, this is happening all the time. So to me, the paranormal is not, I use the paranormal, I find it fascinating, but the way I use the ghost is not exactly thinking about religious, spiritual beliefs or anything like that, but more like a metaphor. I think we live in a very haunted culture.
Yesterday you said something that struck me, which I think was that the ghosts demand justice.
Yeah.
Could you say some more about that?
Well, historically, the ghost in the ghost story and ghost story as a literary genre and the ghost stories, like the ghost stories that people tell, most of the time are people that were wronged, people that were killed, people that were assassinated. That is not necessarily the same. People that were buried in a wrong place. That's very common in especially in old tales. People that bury the, I don't know, bury the a treasure somewhere. That's a classic, very old ghost story, and they want you to give it to the person that it was supposed to be given, and somehow it was taken from them. But most of the ghosts are saying, my child was taken from me. Can you do something? And of course you can't. I was killed, and I'm still in this house because it's a memory of, it's a memory. And many ghosts, that memory is the memory of something terrible that happened to them, that in the first stance is a private thing, but then is a social thing. And even in the first, like Elizabeth Browning, for example, one of the first 19th century ghost story writers, friend of Dickens. Dickens was her first publisher. She wrote a very, very famous ghost story that's called The Story of the Old Nurse or something like that. And what it's about this very classical setting. An old woman takes care of a child. They go to a manor in the countryside in Britain, and what the girl sees outside of the window is another little girl that's dead, a ghost, and she wants to play with her. Anyway, they start investigating, and that dead girl has a dead mother, and then they investigate more of what happened in that manor. Is that the man of the place, when found out that the father, when he found out that her daughter was pregnant of someone, he put her in the, what we would say now, put her in the street, only this is, England in the winter, and out in the field, so she dies in the cold with the baby, and she's trying to come back to the house. So what she is saying first is she's telling a story of injustice, of what happened to a woman that made something wrong those days, and even a rich woman like she was. And also she's taking shelter. That was something that was denied when she most needed it, by her own father. And then in the end, what she's saying is she's asking for justice. She's saying this should not be done to a woman. A woman should not be put in the cold and freezing in the snow with a child. And she's reminded you this all the time. Since that is a classic ghost story, they know what happened to her, and there's some kind of redemption, and she goes away. In the modern short story, because it's very clear that justice had to be done when she was alive, the ghost will never stop haunting you. It doesn't matter if you find, and this goes to any kind of social violence, trauma, etc. It doesn't matter if you fix some problem. For example, I don't know. There's so many examples that it's absolutely impossible. But what I say, if you write a novel that implies, I don't know, a common grave in any country, there's many that have common graves. The fact that you take every bone and you put a name to every grave, and you finished that, and you give them back their identity, being it Mexico or, I don't know, Spain, which has exactly, that doesn't fix anything for them. They are still going to be, they have still been in a clandestine grave for so and so years, a road has been built on top of them. I mean, it's over. And then yes, you can redeem yourself in the present, but the damage and the hurt and the history has been done. That's why the modern ghost story can have a clean ending, because it doesn't matter. It's a bit like noir fiction. Before Chandler and Hammett and stuff, kind of, they fixed the crime, and society was fixed.
Right.
And then comes Chandler and Hammett and all the writers of the 30s and 40s in LA, and they say, no. There is society that it's, we can find the killer, but that doesn't fix anything. And with ghosts, it's the same. You can find the bones, but that doesn't fix, and this is going to happen again. So, yeah, that's why I say it's mostly what they ask is for justice.
So that seems to speak to maybe a shift in mindset from a world where people believed that progress could be made and systems could be fixed, to a worldview that believes that injustice is systemic, it's there, and it's not going to go anywhere. Sort of like you're speaking of these cycles in Argentina, the boom, bust, the repeat and repeat. So I guess my question would be, because you said yesterday, one thing that stuck with me as well is that I think you said we live in uncertain times, but not necessarily bad times.
Yeah.
Which to me speaks of progress of a sort.
Yeah.
And so I wonder how you kind of put all of that together, if that's not too broad of a
Yeah,
question.
I mean, yes, I understand what you mean. I think there is there certainly is progress of a sort when we think about anything, medicine, like 2 centuries ago, extended wars 2 centuries ago. I mean, we've been to imagine that when Europe came to this continent, there was 80% of the people that lived here died. Not just in wars, but with diseases and stuff. 80%. So the ones that survived and that we have in our blood, me just one grandmother. The rest are coming from Europe, but the ones that survived, they survived a lot, and in very small communities. So sometimes when you read the chronicles of Indians when they were coming and they say, all this space or this empty jungle, really what they are seeing is, for the people here, they're seeing the apocalypse, really. They were all dead. It was not that, it was a lot of space with no one. And so certainly from that, and even from the 40s in the 19th century, when we can say now there's a rise in let's say fascism is too strong of a word, but let's say very reactionary political movements. Yeah, but we can, a lot of people that disagree with that can point to it, describe it, recognize it. In the 40s, they didn't know what was going on. And the consequences of that were massive. And massive also in capitalism, and then in the world divided in communism and the Cold War. All that is not what we are living through now. Even with, of course, there's the problem of Gaza, etc. That is also a problem of the 20th century. I mean, that yet has to be resolved. In a way that many colonial issues yet have to be resolved. But we can recognize them. We can call this is what's going on. And don't know if that is progress, but it is. Knowledge is always progress. Then you can be cynical and people can be cruel, but still is something going on there. But what to me has been destroyed in other way are other kind of limits. First, the limit between reality And if you could call it that fiction, the possibility, the certain possibility that it could be a deep fake of any world leader done perfectly, saying something that can produce any kind of disaster and tragedy, that, even the possibility that that exists, even if it hasn't been done yet, but it could be done tomorrow, that makes reality seem very unreliable, and that's terrifying. Because you can't, even if you have the knowledge, that's terrifying. A few years ago, I thought, since I'm a journalist and I'm interested in communication issues and stuff, I could tell a deep fake or something done by artificial intelligence. No, not anymore. They fool me.
Sure.
And they fool me all the time. Maybe they don't fool me with, I don't know, the sequel of Titanic, for example.
Right.
I know people that found that, like, well, why not, like, you know, doing it with other, because of the door, of course. And if he can be on the door or not, that of course he can be on the door, she's awful. But that is just like the rudimentary first things like that. But now it's like, I don't know. I'm a fan of tennis, for example. And yesterday I was listening to maybe nobody cares about this, but it's a good example. Rafael Nadal retired, and he told about it in Spanish. But they tease him a lot, because his English is quite bad. So they did a deep fake of Nadal in English, when he was saying a completely different thing and in his broken English. And I was listening to this and I was like, how nobody's telling Rafa that he should improve his English? And then after a minute of this, I said, fuck, this is fake. How, I mean, and the reality there is like, because it's not someone that I don't know. I'm not a fan of Nadal, but I've been following him for 20 years. So it's like, what is going on? So that was what I mean about uncertain times. We don't know. We live also in a very codified society where, for example, I'm 50. I've been through 4 changes of, I started with cassettes, then I moved to vinyls, I moved to CDs, and now I'm Spotify, and this is only 30 years of listening to music. And it's the same with, I don't know, health products. You are like bombarded by things. What should I do? You know, eat, I don't know, cockroaches in the morning because it's, you know, you have to have the, it's and to what purpose? At the same time that we have destroyed the planet. So why do we want to live forever if we're not going to have an atmosphere, and why are we not fixing it? It's all very, language and reality are completely crashed. Like, you know, like a window sill in a car that you throw, it's not, shattered. It's shattered. It hasn't, the rock is not inside. That would be 20th century. Now you can't see anything, because it's all shattered. And that's what I mean with uncertain times. You can't really, and therefore the moral compass is all, you know, crazy too, because you don't know what is the enemy and where you should put your energy.
So, question on another topic that you brought up yesterday that I found interesting. You drew a very stark distinction between writing short stories and writing novels.
Yeah.
In the sense that, you know, short story is a scene, a moment. What is your process for writing a novel? How do you get into that?
It's characters. I mean, I barely investigate for novels. I have several things that interest me in my mind, and that I study them because I like to. So sometimes characters appear that live in these worlds that I imagine or that I find interesting, and that usually becomes a novel. And it doesn't have an idea, it has many. It has layers of ideas, like any novel has, but it comes with that. The layers come with the characters. In a short story, it's an image, and of course a novel. For me, the novels are very plotty. They have plot to me. And but short stories, I think they are more about an idea, or yes, an image, or even an atmosphere that I want to express. And novels for me is a very long process. It's a very lived process, and short stories not necessarily. It could be done in an afternoon, and then you fix them for however amount of time you need. But that's very, Borges had that distinction. And that's our canon writer, and that's what you learn in school. So I'm kind of from that tradition. But the difference is that he despised novels. He never wrote a novel. No, he hated. Yeah. He hated novels because he didn't care about people. He only maybe in his everyday life, but in literature.
Sure.
He didn't care about characters. He didn't like the long 19th century French or Russian novel. He was absolutely into British short fiction and fiction of ideas kind of twists and this playing with words and inventing. It was a very paratext, meta-text, what he did. So he was much more interested in procedure than in storytelling.
Right.
But that idea of the novel and the short story, I agree, taking away the negative things he said about the novel, like everything negative he says about the novel, I said, no, but that's cool. So
then this kind of leads into an interesting question. So this is being put on by the Translation Studies Department? Okay, so Borges, when he was alive, he worked with Tomás Di Giovanni to translate his works. But they actually worked together on drafts. Borges spoke English, read English, but didn't translate. He worked with Di Giovanni, and a lot of times the English versions were different in ways from the original Spanish version. When you have your works translated from Spanish into English, your English is perfect, very, very good, obviously. How do you handle that process with your translator? Does she do everything and then send you a draft, or do you talk in advance about what you're trying to get at with the story and what you want to come across? How does that look?
Megan has translated everything that in English, and she is American. She's from Kentucky, but she lived, I think, half of her adult life or more in South America and in Spain. That is very interesting for me because there's a lot of culture things that I don't have to talk about with her, or very little. Or because she knows the culture, she knows the politics, she's lived through it, she lived the bureaucracy, she bought a house in Chile, so I don't really have to do that. But she's very precise. She sends me long questionnaires, and in that we start the conversation. And sometimes she has to change things, but not only change words, but change paragraphs. Like in English, for example, it makes much more sense that this appears before this, and stuff like that. And yes, we talk a lot. And I talk a lot with her. We get along also. But it's more of a process that she starts doing it and we talk. We don't talk before. But also I try this translation that is the one I can read easily. I can read English much better than I can speak, as everybody with the language. Speaking is the last frontier. And so I can't really have an opinion on it. In general, I agree a lot with her decisions, but also, and this is not all the time fortunate, but it happens, and it's like that. Many languages that maybe can have other translators from Spanish to, let's say, Bulgarian, they would go to the English translation. So to me, it's important that this is the version, let's say, that I can supervise more. And she's very conscious of this too. Like this is the first thing is in Spanish, but the second one that they're going to check is in English, and they do.
That's the reference point.
They would be the reference point, yes, and they do it a lot. They, before coming to me, many of the translators of, because it's not that the problem is not people that can speak, let's say, Spanish and Hungarian or Serbian. There's lots of people that can speak it, but it's a totally different thing to do a literary translation. And so there's a lot of people that can speak it that, you know, are in embassies. There's many people speak Spanish, but it's other thing to write, because she's writing. So of that, maybe there's one or two. And the reference, most of the time, it's the English version. So yes, this one I wouldn't say supervise, but we work together a lot. Yeah, we collaborate a lot. And in other languages, not necessarily. Not even in languages that are much closer to Spanish, like Portuguese or Italian. I don't really read them, and they don't really ask me things. And sometimes it's more about context, but not that much, because it's very transparent. Yeah.
And so then, back to your novel writing process. I'm just thinking in terms of, you know, you read different books about writing. Some people plot out everything in advance. They write an outline before they write a single scene. Other people start writing scenes and want the characters to take them on the journey and then put it all together, which, and sometimes every novel is different.
Yeah.
Do you have a particular process, or has each novel been kind of its own creature? How has that?
My first novel, since I was very young, I just kind of produced a method, and it was a method that many people use, because I don't think there's many other ways, but it was, since I got bored writing the bridges between scenes and the obligatory planes that are between that was very boring to me when I was 17. So what I did was writing the interesting scenes and then connecting them. I still do that, but now I do that with an architecture, never plotting before or anything like that, but yes, saying this part of the novel, this part, not a chapter or anything, this part is going to go from here to here. And then in that, I write the scenes, and then I do the connections between scenes. But I do, in this novel, it's very long, so I really needed the architecture. Even when I was writing a scene to say, okay, this goes in part 4, part 3, it was a bit like that. But in the first novel, I was completely like in the woods. I didn't know. It was just, a lake here, another lake here, and I had to build a bridge between the two, and it was complicated.
And you mentioned some writers that, just in passing, that I take you either inspired you or you learned from. I mean, what would be your top 3 writers that are just favorites that you always go back and even reread things? Because I rarely reread, but there's a few that I do.
That's one is Toni Morrison. That the other one is Manuel Puig in Spanish, and I think I go. It's weird to mention him, but I go back a lot. It's not of no use to me, but I go a lot to William Faulkner just because I like him. But what I get from him is atmosphere. Many of the things I write take place in very humid, hot places that are, decadent, cursed. So there's an atmosphere there, not a style, nothing, that is completely useless to me. But there's an atmosphere there that it's closer to me than many things in Spanish. And I love Manuel Puig, and I write it, that has nothing to do with what I do. But for certain things, like plotting or seeing how you do terrifying scene stuff, early Stephen King is pretty much unbeatable in that. Like, the first 5, 6 novels, if you need to scare someone, it's all there. It's all there. You don't need much more than that. And he has many, 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 many scenes that you can turn around. Yes, and many things are strangely related to my experience. Like in It, for example, he uses a lot of refrigerators. And in Argentina, there is many places, like parking lots full of refrigerators that have been abandoned because there was a big industry crisis and they just threw away everything or abandoned these factories that were doing things for the house that were not, they're not made anymore in any country just about, but anyway, that was very obvious in the 70s in Argentina. So those places are very scary. And for some reason, there's lots in Maine, in his novels at least. So some things are really, that is very practical to me, just go to this. And Peter Straub and a lot of very popular writers that really know what they're doing, and I have tons of respect for them.
So we want to make sure that we leave time for questions, for book sales and signing. And I don't know if you'd like to maybe read a little something from one of your novels?
I can, of course. I can do a bit of the novel. This is, of course, I did not write this. So it's very strange, but yeah.
Does everyone speak Spanish now? Pues puedes hacerlo en español si quieres.
Lo puedo leer en español, mejor.
Sí, mejor, ¿no?
Mejor, sí. A ver. ¿Qué tenemos por acá? Este es... vamos a hacer algo bien feo. Ya que estamos, algo bien asqueroso. Ya voy a encontrar, ¿eh? ¿Dónde está la parte que quiero cuando él hace una cosa particularmente horrible? Acá está. Juan es el protagonista del libro, ¿no? Cerró la puerta despacio, guardó una pequeña linterna en el bolsillo de atrás del jean y caminó tratando de no hacer ruido hasta la entrada del túnel entre las casas. Hacía años se había usado para excentricidades, para que los sirvientes lo transitaran cuando llovía, así no ensuciaban ni la casa de huéspedes ni la principal con barro colorado, para guardar muebles en desuso y para encuentros clandestinos. Alguna vez se había instalado una especie de lavandería subterránea de platos y ropa. Pero después de la inundación ya no quedaba túnel. El barro había arrasado con los ladrillos, provocando una avalancha, salvo en el primer tramo que aún mantenía la vieja puerta de hierro con su candado. Juan la abrió sin pensarlo siquiera. Cuando entró, sintió el olor y el sufrimiento de las criaturas que vivían ahí. Encendió la linterna y caminó casi arrodillado. El túnel era bajo y para él, que medía 2 metros, resultaba estrechísimo. Entonces encontró al primer chico. Estaba en una jaula para animales, seguramente traída del zoológico vecino. Recordó cuando Rosario había sido obligada a cuidar de otra camada de chicos secuestrados que Mercedes guardaba en uno de sus campos de la provincia de Buenos Aires, y él había decidido ayudarla. Aquella vez también estaban en jaulas. Ahora el primer chico estaba en una jaula oxidada y sucia que posiblemente había cargado animales. La pierna izquierda la tenía atada a la espalda en una posición que había obligado a quebrarle la cadera. Como era muy chico, 1 año, difícil de saberlo por la mugre, seguramente la quebradura había resultado sencilla. Tenía el cuello ya torcido también por la ubicación del pie, y cuando Juan le acercó la linterna para verlo mejor, reaccionó como un animal, con la boca abierta y un gruñido. Le habían cortado la lengua en 2 y ahora era bífida. A su alrededor, adentro de la jaula, estaban los restos de su comida, esqueletos de gatos y algunos pequeños huesos humanos. Juan siguió. Había más jaulas. Los otros niños y niñas eran más grandes. Muchos lo miraban detenidamente con sus ojos negros. Algunos eran niños guaraníes que probablemente no sabían hablar español. Otros quizá eran hijos de los hombres y las mujeres que se entregaban en sacrificio a la oscuridad. Algunos reaccionaban a su aparición yéndose hacia el fondo de la jaula, otros apenas abrían los ojos. Vio criaturas con los dientes limados de forma tal que sus dentaduras parecían sierras. Vio a chicos con la obvia marca de la tortura en sus piernas, sus espaldas, sus genitales. Olió la podredumbre de chicos que ya debían estar muertos. ¿Dejaban los cadáveres ahí para que el olor se les volviera familiar a los demás? A Rosario la habían obligado a enterrar a los enjaulados que morían. Vio heridas supurantes, infecciones, ojos por los que caminaban los bichos de la humedad y el río. Se detuvo después de unos 100 metros de jaulas llenas de criaturas destrozadas, vivas y muertas. Dedujo que las jaulas ocupaban los 100 metros que quedaban de túnel. Volvió, dispuesto a enfrentar a Mercedes, que lo esperaba junto a la puerta, junto a su imbunche. Juan apagó la linterna cuando Mercedes encendió una débil lamparita, la única iluminación del túnel. Así que esta es tu nueva colección, Mercedes. Dará resultado. Nuestro Dios lo dice, indica que debe hacerse así. Es un Dios loco como vos. No, es así, es fea. Un imbunche es un monstruo de la mitología chilena. Lo tomé de ahí. Me interesaba poner en esta novela bastante mitología latinoamericana que no se suele usar y de supersticiones que no se suelen usar en literatura. Por eso hablaba antes de lo oral. Hay un montón de terror en lo oral. Y en Chiloé, que es una isla al sur de Chile, hay una leyenda que es una leyenda sobre la brujería, que es una organización, pero no muy distinto a lo caribeño porque creo que hay una tendencia a ser muy homogéneo todo lo que pasa en América Latina, y esto no es la brujería como lo podés pensar en México o como lo podés pensar en el Caribe, sino es en el sur, que es tiene otra morfología. Bueno, pero los brujos que se juntan son muy brujos del bosque. Tiene algo que es un poco más europeo, pero es solo porque hay bosques fríos en el sur del planeta. Entonces tienes un poco de esa idea. Y viven en una cueva, y la cueva está protegida por un niño como ese, al que le dicen imbunche, que es un niño al que deforman cuando es chiquito y se va volviendo cada vez menos humano y asusta a la gente y protege la cueva de los brujos que hacen maldades. Sería larguísimo que hacen, pero son malos. Y esto es una mitología que para mí, cuando yo la leí la primera vez, o sea, trato de no usar mitología y cosas así de una manera turística. Quiero decir, yo tengo que tener alguna relación con eso, personal o libresca, pero que me haya obsesionado. No me gusta decir, bueno, Google, investigo mitos de no sé qué y los pongo en una novela. Me parece que eso es como la peor literatura y la peor manera de también aproximarse a la mitología latinoamericana, ¿no? Es horrible. Es como vender trinkets, es lo mismo. Pero yo supe del imbunche, curiosamente, por 2 autores británicos. Uno es Bruce Chatwin, que un diario de viaje que se llama En Patagonia, escribió sobre el imbunche fascinado, escribió 7 hojas, fascinado lógicamente. Y yo pensaba, ¿cómo puede ser que nosotros no usemos ese mito, que es nuestro? José Donoso, que es un escritor chileno, lo usó en una novela, pero muy poco, y en general no se usa mucho. Y luego lo encontré en un cómic de Alan Moore, en La cosa del pantano. También apareció un imbunche en Londres, en uno de los... Se lo habían traído, no me acuerdo cómo era, pero lo habían traído a América Latina para también hacer maldades, y aparecía en el metro, digamos, de Londres. Y yo ahí tuve una especie de revelación borgiana, de decir, mira, como esta gente está tomando estos mitos de otro lugar, como Borges tomaba Islandia, y hace con ellos lo que quiere, y nosotros tenemos que hacer exactamente lo mismo porque tenemos más referencias para poder comprenderlos. Así que eso es una variación de lo que harían los brujos de Chiloé con imbunches. Bueno, es una... tomar nuestras propias mitologías, yo creo que hay que hacerlo, pero no es tan fácil. O sea, no es tan fácil en el sentido de a mí no me gusta caer en la venta de souvenirs. La idea es lo que está cerca de uno. Y cuando uno empieza a acercarse cada vez más, se da cuenta que lo que está cerca de uno es muchísimo. Lo que pasa es que no está tan acostumbrado a ponerlo en literatura.
Muy bien. De todo lo que has escrito, ¿cuál es el bebé? ¿Cuál es el favorito? ¿De historias, de lo que sea?
No, la novela, sí.
¿Sí? La novela.
Sí, y la historia del título del último libro también me gusta mucho.
La de la chica de California.
Sí, sí, me parece como romántica, no me parece un cuento de terror. Me parece un cuento que para mí es difícil hacer un cuento como de amor, que me sale un poco así. Pero sí, la novela y además me dio como satisfacciones personales, quiero decir. Entonces le tengo un cariño especial también en ese sentido, más allá de lo literario.
Muy bien. Pues vamos a ver, ¿hay preguntas del público?
Bueno, muchas gracias Mariana y también por facilitar la conversación. Aprovecho de decir que de parte de la universidad acá estamos muy contentos de que estás acá. Es increíble tener una autora como de talante aquí, así que muchas gracias por tomar tiempo de estar acá. Mi pregunta prácticamente tiene que ver con algo muy interesante que dijiste ahorita y también dijiste ayer, que yo también estaba atendiendo tu charla de ayer en el Texas Theater, sobre la relación que tú haces entre la escritura de terror y la crítica, digamos, sociopolítica, ¿no? Y una de las cosas que me pareció extremadamente fascinante fue cuando empezaste a hacer como una reflexión sobre por qué te atraía tanto las novelas de Stephen King, ¿no? A partir de esa idea de que el hombre escribe de una manera tal que las cosas que él pone en la novela son como una reflexión, un espejo crítico donde podemos pensar sobre, por ejemplo, la homofobia, podemos pensar sobre muchas cosas de ese ámbito. Entonces, una de las cosas que me pareció interesante que mencionaste ahorita, ¿no? Las cuestiones de, por ejemplo, cómo ahora tenemos que enfrentarnos a los deepfake o, por ejemplo, el mass surveillance, cosas de ese tipo. Y entonces yo me pregunto si tú, y ligado un poco a esa cuestión de lo fantasmático, lo fantástico, si eso es algo que te interesa explorar a través de la literatura.
Sí, me interesa. Es bien difícil, creo, y creo que hay muchos autores que lo están haciendo y lo están haciendo muy bien. Pero tengo pequeños intentos, digamos, ¿no? De hacerlo. Uno fue, creo que lo hablamos ayer también, lo que a mí me interesa mucho, que es la cuestión de cómo Internet, de alguna manera, hizo que la nube, ¿no? La idea de la nube. Hay cosas que no se pueden borrar más. Es como una hipermemoria. Y de ahí tomé solamente un fantasma que está ahí, que es el de Lisa Lam, pero el origen fue ver obsesivamente su video en YouTube. Y me interesa, pero es difícil en el sentido de que tiene toda una parte muy técnica que lo acerca mucho a tradicionalmente lo que es la ciencia ficción. Yo estoy tratando de buscar en eso lo que es eerie, digamos, y que hay un montón. Desde el tema del doble, desde Me acuerdo incluso en la primera época, creo que lo dijimos anoche, pero un par de cosas fueron muy raras. La primera época de la pandemia, los Zooms, había, ¿cómo se dice en inglés? Hecklers. O sea, gente que se metía en los Zooms y que hacía cosas raras. Entonces vos dabas clase y veías a tus 20 alumnos y había uno acá que era... Y uno no sabía si apagar, decirle que se vaya, y el tipo a veces se ponía caretas, hacía... Era rarísimo, y vos decís, ¿qué es? ¿Es una persona, es una fantasma, es un defecto de la Matrix? ¿Entramos en otro lugar? ¿Qué pasó? Y ese tipo de cosas me interesan. Hay un evento, por ejemplo, el que ya escribieron otros autores, pero que a mí me interesa mucho. En el 2007 es cuando se pasa todas las transmisiones de todo, de televisión, de cable, de todo, a digital. Y hay un momento que se hace el glitch es el traspaso, dura segundos, para terminar con todo lo analógico y empezar con todo lo digital. Y hubo un montón de nerds en el mundo que estuvieron frente a una pantalla para ver cómo se hacía eso. Hay una novela que sé que van a publicar hace poco sobre gente que descubre que eso era un portal hacia algún lugar, y claro, porque lo es de alguna manera, es una puerta para otra cosa. Entonces yo estoy tratando de buscar temas que tengan que ver con eso, con lo que es eerie, más que con la cuestión más técnica de eso que me parece que la ciencia ficción lo está haciendo increíblemente bien, porque es un paseo para un escritor de ciencia ficción. Pero el escritor de ciencia ficción piensa de otra manera, piensa en el futuro, piensa en lo distópico, piensa en lo alternativo. El escritor del terror piensa en cómo lo alternativo invade esta realidad. Es al revés. Entonces, pero sí me interesa mucho. Y me parece muy terrorífico además. O sea, es realmente una cosa horrible. Así que, sí.
Muy bien. ¿Otra pregunta? ¿Alguien?
Si no, yo también tengo otra, pero...
Sí.
Muchas gracias por estar aquí. No, mi pregunta tiene que ver con el tema del sexo en tus libros. O sea, muchas veces, por ejemplo, cuando leí Nuestra parte de noche, yo estaba leyendo diciendo, ay, llegar a una escena de sexo y tú dices, ah, interesante, ok, leemos, pero de repente se vuelve como medio grotesca la escena, ¿no? Entonces, mi pregunta es, ¿cómo piensas, por una parte, el tema del sexo en general en tus libros, pero también la sexualidad, y también cuando estás escribiendo, de dónde sacas influencias, o cómo piensas, o sea, esa, like, the turn of kind of, oh, this is a normal sex scene and then it turns weird.
Yo siempre quise escribir o sea, siempre escribí de sexo desde mi primera novela, o escenas eróticas, digamos, ¿no? En la primera novela no tenía la conciencia que tuve después con el common sense de literatura, o que es como que es difícil hacerlo. Yo no creo que no es tan difícil. O por lo menos hay que intentarlo, no es más difícil que alguna otra cosa. Creo que es un resto de puritanismo, como cuando la gente dice, ay, es difícil. No es tan difícil. Lo que pasa es que hay que entrar ahí, cuando uno escribe erotismo, en un lugar bastante complejo, que es muy difícil escribir, o sea, es muy fácil escribir una escena de terror que a uno no le dé miedo. Es muy difícil escribir una escena de sexo que a uno no lo erotice. O sea, ahí de verdad es necesario eso. Y a veces hay que ir a lugares oscuros, porque uno escribe con la imaginación, escribe con la fantasía, no con lo que realmente te erotiza en la vida real, sino con ese ámbito un poco literario. Y para llegar a esas cosas, en general uso música. Yo creo que la música, por ser abstracta y por tocarte de una manera muy, muy especial y ser muy física, o sea, que te obliga a moverte, es lo más cercano a una experiencia del orden del éxtasis, o sea, de lo erótico. Y también se puede volver muy, muy grotesco desde el principio de los tiempos, quiero decir, o sea, como ese frenesí de baile y de música puede ir hacia un lugar muy sensual y puede ir hacia un lugar tormentoso y raro y orgiástico. Entonces a mí la música es lo que me... Y la música también se puede volver un poco absurda a veces, ¿no? Una canción, no sé si la conocen, pero una canción de Prince como Darling Nikki, por ejemplo, empieza muy sensual y termina con Prince gritando como un loco, y decís, bueno, esto no... no necesariamente, pero bueno, el sexo es un poco absurdo. Y un poco raro también a veces, ¿no? O sea, es básicamente dos personas que no se conocen mucho, desnudas, en un estado de vulnerabilidad total. O sea, uno puede matar al otro fácilmente. Entonces trato de pensarlo en ese sentido. Pero también porque me parece que el terror y el fantástico y todos esos géneros, la ciencia ficción también, suelen estar muy asociados a young adult, ¿no? Y yo creo que no. Y no es que ponga el sexo y un erotismo adulto, quiero decir, ahí a propósito por eso, sino porque yo no lo tomo como que tengo que cuidar a nadie, quiero decir. Y porque para mí son géneros para adultos. Pero sí me pasa a veces, sobre todo en español, hay muchos cuentos de los libros que se pueden leer en colegios, pero de repente viene uno donde, no sé, hay un personaje que tiene un fetiche con órganos del cuerpo y se erotiza con órganos, ¿no? Y está en el mismo libro que los demás, entonces es como para los profesores de alumnos de 15 años, dicen, bueno, lean hasta acá, estos dos no, y después estos dos sí, y me parece que esa es como la dificultad de aceptar que los escritores de la imaginación no escriben para jóvenes ni para niños. Pero hay como una especie de problema que hace que a los 18 años tengas que leer o ver o lo que sea. O sea, la imaginación es como una etapa. Y yo creo que no es así. Y una de las maneras para mí de expresarlo en su totalidad es poner una sexualidad adulta, cosa que después pone en problemas a los lectores, sobre todo jóvenes, ¿no? Que a veces les tengo que decir, bueno, a los padres, le digo, bueno, mira, no sé, mi hija tiene 14, ¿te puedo leer? Le digo, bueno, no, depende.
Claro, sí.
Depende.
Muy bien. ¿Tenías otra pregunta?
Sí, bueno, no, nada más quería hacer como, agregar algo, porque me pareció interesante como hacías una distinción entre la ciencia ficción y el terror. En parte porque sí, también yo estaba pensando, por ejemplo, la manera en que hay una conexión, por ejemplo, entre los fantasmáticos, cómo nosotros vivimos los fantasmáticos, a través de, como mencionaste tú, un video de YouTube donde ves a alguien que ya falleció, pero tienes esta experiencia un poco, y yo creo que en este caso, como filósofo de profesión, Sigmund Freud tiene la palabra exacta que es das Unheimlich, ¿no? Sí. Lo desconcertante. Sí. Es muy desconcertante, sí, ver el video de Elisa Lam. Y hay ciertas experiencias, ¿no? Como por ejemplo escuchar un mensaje de voz que alguien te dejó, que ya falleció, sí, un familiar, un amigo, y tú lo escuchas y tú sabes que esa persona ya no está, y sin embargo escuchas su voz, tienes esa misma conexión afectiva. Entonces sí, me parece interesante esa manera que tú haces de decir como que hay una forma específica del terror que de explorar esa relación entre lo fantasmático y lo tecnológico que no vira hacia la ciencia ficción. Y entonces me interesa mucho, sí, pensar esa cuestión, muy interesante.
Sí, yo lo estuve leyendo bastante, hay dos... sobre todo Mark Fisher, todo el hauntology que piensa, porque Fisher piensa desde un punto de vista cultural, no desde el punto de vista de tecnológico ni nada que se le parezca. Entonces, de la manera que él lo piensa es como, eso la hauntología, digamos, es como que además también viene de la ontología de Derrida, ¿no? Es y del marxismo, ¿no? Es el fantasma del comunismo. Pero que también es algo que no digamos que nunca se hace como tiene que hacerse, pero sin embargo, bueno, pero lo de la voz es muy interesante porque además yo lo estuve estudiando un poco. Lo primero que uno olvida de alguien es la voz, incluso antes que el olor y todo, por algún motivo es como, entonces tener la voz, o sea, somos casi la primera generación que puede preservar en un mensaje de texto la voz de alguien que murió. Y eso, o sea, ese fantasma es un fantasma nuevo. No existía, podía existir en una película antes y qué sé yo, pero tener eso, la idea sola de tener mensajes de voz, ¿no? Y es la dificultad que uno puede tener, por ejemplo, con borrar direcciones o borrar, o el hecho de que perdés tu móvil y a lo mejor estás perdiendo el último recuerdo de tu madre. Es así de fantasmática la relación con nuestro, cómo nos relacionamos con nuestro mundo y con la comunicación hoy. Entonces sí, es muy diferente a la ciencia ficción. Por eso creo que la ciencia ficción se fue más hacia lo híbrido. O sea, hay muchos escritores, sobre todo en español, Michelle Nieva, Luis Castro Barragán, que están trabajando mucho con distopía, con el cyborg, pero ya no tanto con la máquina, sino con lo bio. Es más pensar en lo poshumano relacionado con otro tipo de, lo neurobiológico, por ejemplo, con hacer inserciones con otros sistemas vivos, sobre todo con virus. Virus, bacterias, etcétera, ¿no? Luis Castro Barragán tiene un libro extraordinario que se llama Parásitos Perfectos, donde la gente está usando autos que son grandes insectos, por ejemplo. Es una cosa, o sea, pensando en la habilidad que tiene el insecto de ver para todos lados, o sea, lograr hacer con, digamos, una mejora a partir de eso. Pero el terror es otra cosa. Es más insidioso, digamos.
Gracias.
De nada.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Es que
Sí, a mí me interesó bastante cuando estábamos hablando de Limbuche y cómo usted por la primera vez lo vio en formas de literatura que venían de lugares como Inglaterra, así con el lenguaje inglés siendo como un lugar donde se ve estas percepciones y estas mitologías indígenas. Y quería preguntar si en tus escrituras es algo que has considerado cómo es esta presentación de la cultura indígena y cómo podemos como autores latinoamericanos evitar hacer los mismos errores de gente inglés, gente así que toma la perspectiva del imperialista, del colonialista, cuando estamos escribiendo de grupos así que han sufrido el horror, los fantasmas de genocidios del pasado.
Yo creo que hay que relajarse ideológicamente con eso en este sentido. Muchos de nosotros, me incluyo, somos parte tenemos una herencia colonial más grande que la herencia indígena, cultural, familiar, etcétera. Eso no significa que no podamos o que no tengamos una influencia y una cercanía muy importante con esas tradiciones que igual de todas maneras, salvo en muy pocos grupos, ya están muy sincretizadas, muy contaminadas en el mejor sentido y que ya no son puras. Entonces, me parece que tomarlas con todo el respeto que se toma cualquier iniciativa creativa, es suficiente. Creo que que a esta altura es muy peligroso decir, bueno, de esto no puedo hablar por respeto porque sufrieron esto. Todo el mundo sufrió algo, todos. Entonces, si todos podemos hablar solamente acerca de lo que nos pasó a nosotros y no de lo que es cercano, o sea, existe, quiero decir, el artista debería tener, o en la mayoría de los casos por suerte lo tiene, la virtud de ser empático. Entonces puede hablar de eso sin necesidad de tener la identidad tan adelante. O sea, creo que el tema de poner siempre la identidad adelante nos distrae de, sobre todo, tratar de conocer a las otras identidades. Porque decir, bueno, de esto no puedo hablar, o de esto no puedo interesarme, o de esto no, porque porque les pasó algo doloroso. A todo el mundo le pasó algo doloroso. Entonces para mí tenemos que tratar de acercarnos con menos miedo al dolor, a la ofensa. A mí particularmente no me molesta, quiero decir, como latinoamericana y como argentina que atravesó una dictadura, si alguien tiene ganas de escribir sobre la dictadura argentina. Basta que lo haga con respeto y lo investigue y está bien. Entonces, yo creo que como escritores y como artistas tenemos que volver al respeto de la curiosidad, quiero decir. Y sin preocuparnos tanto por en qué lugar estamos parados. Si estamos parados en el lugar del colonial, eso ocurre. Nosotros ahora también estamos parados en un lugar que dentro de 50 años quizá vaya a ser discutible. No podemos saber. Entonces, en vez de quedarse quieto, me parece que hay que accionar y equivocarse. Y no tener miedo a equivocarse y decir, bueno, esto a lo mejor lo podría haber tratado de otra manera, pero a mí me resulta una gran limitación y muy frustrante digamos que tener que pensar primero dónde estoy parada antes de aproximarme de lo que quiero hablar. Y trato de no hacerlo. O sea, de no pensar tanto en la identidad y pensar más en la clase, pensar más en la desigualdad, pensar más en la visibilidad. O sea, eso a mí me parece, sobre todo creativamente, no estoy hablando tanto sino, por ejemplo, para hacer un trabajo literario. Me interesa mucho más que la identidad. La identidad es muy limitante. Yo podría hablar incluso mi identidad es mucho más fluida de lo que es en principio. Entonces, de lo que yo podría hablar, si tuviese que pensar en todas esas limitaciones, es realmente muy poco. Y creo que la literatura es uno de los pocos lugares que quedan donde todavía podemos cometer errores, quiero decir, y está bien.
Muy bien. Pues I'm going to wrap there. We're supposed to be done at 3, and I want to give time for people to buy books, which are here from the UT Dallas bookstore, as well as get them signed by Mariana.
Okay.
And read the books, write reviews, and put them on Amazon. Reviews are very important. Reviews sell books, so please do that. And I want to thank Mariana for...
No, thank you.
No, for a wonderful interview. It's
thank
fascinating.
You.
Wonderful to meet you. And
thank
I'm going to get this
much.
one signed for myself.
Okay, please.
So thank
you
all.
Thank you very much.